So conflict is a really good thing, and we're going to talk about this on this podcast, and you're going to be glad that you heard this, because I think this is a concept that a lot of people really miss when it comes to conflict. They always feel like it's bad, but the truth is you're going to have conflict whether you want it or not. And if you're willing to address things, learn how to get good at confronting, you can be in control of it and control the outcome. And it doesn't just have to come to this place of to where everybody's fighting and feuding, but you get used to confronting situations together. Therefore, you have a really great outcome. So this podcast here will really help you get set straight and set on a course to being able to have really good, healthy conflict.
I always thought that conflict is not a good thing, and so that you should avoid it at all costs, but it was still there. So avoiding conflict isn't necessarily a good thing at all.
Right.
I've found that conflict is actually necessary, and that when you have conflict, you actually build relationship, or can build relationship, because you know you're coming to this point where you're saying, I don't agree with what it is that you're saying. But just because you don't agree with somebody or you're having conflict doesn't mean that you aren't in relationship, or that you don't love them.
I'm going to go so far as to say that you're not in a real relationship if you don't have conflict. You have a superficial relationship with whoever or whatever, whether you're talking about an organization, you're talking about a marriage, you're talking about a family, you're talking about anything. If there's not conflict there, then there is not health there. That's foreign to a lot of people. But the church exists, marriages exist, the family exists, basically to solve problems. Now, the original design of marriage and family, I don't think that would be completely accurate. It was there, like the idea of procreating. That's solving a problem like that, and a marriage fixes that, right? But as far as the problems that we have going on in the world now, that wasn't the original design. But now we've been engrafted into that marriage and family. We need to be able to bring solution, and the church is there exclusively to bring solution to the world. So, we're really geared. We're wired that way. We're supposed to think in terms of this isn't right and we need to fix it. Now, you and I are mercy justice. We deal with people a lot with this. We run into this a lot. A mercy person usually avoids conflict, and a justice person usually will be over conflicting. However, I will say this: that there was a time when I didn't do a lot of conflict, and didn't know how to do conflict because I was had a serious fear of people.
Right.
And so there can be different elements involved that would keep you from having conflict. But if you don't see, conflict is there. So whether you address it or not is really what determines on whether you're going to have health. And if you have, because it is there in every relationship, if you are the kind of person, you're in a marriage or in a household to where you don't ever talk through things and work through things, then you're just pushing things under the rug that are not being dealt with, that are not being talked about. I can say that with 100% certainty. I don't care what your home is like. If you don't have things come up that you have to say, we have to address this, we have to hit it head on, then you've got your head in the sand. Just as simple as that. I had a dream one time.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
And the dream was, there was a tornado. We were in this like a shack thing, and in the middle of it, the shack, and it was like we were in fear of the whole building being just ripped to shreds very easily from the storm. It's actually a storm, I think is what it was. But anyways, you were in the middle of it, sleeping in a bed. And when I woke up, and we were talking about it, and then the thought came, was it because you had peace in the storm, or because you had your head in the sand? And when I ask you that question, you're like, honestly, it's because I have my head in the sand and I don't want to approach things.
Right.
So healthy relationships have conflict. They have conflict. They learn how to have conflict resolution. But before you can resolve anything, you have to first acknowledge that there's conflict.
That's right.
And then you have to realize that you need to do something about it. You have to be able to address it. You have to be willing to address it. And it's a sign of a healthy marriage that has conflict and learns how to resolve it. and in a family. I mean, again, any kind of institution. Our church used to have tons of conflict, but we never addressed any of it. And as soon as I started to, it's like as soon as Daddy took hold of the wheel and I started to address it, I took some people off, some people left that needed to go, but it set things right. And now we have, because we haven't done it perfect, but we've done conflict resolution very good in our church. I would say that it's one of our strengths because we do it in love and we do it with the intent of bringing unity and not division.
That's right.
And not about like I'm right and you're wrong, but like let's come to a resolution here. Because we do that, we've set a really good tone that when we have conflict resolution, most of the time people are like, oh, okay, yeah, let's sit down and work through it. It's not the end of the world.
And it actually isn't. It isn't about like the necessarily like there's a conflict and it's blown way out of proportion. It's like, okay, a family has an issue. We're not in agreement, or we're not seeing things eye to eye. And so we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about my perspective. And then guess what? Not only am I going to say my perspective, but now I want to hear your perspective on it. And so instead of it being like this messy, like crazy, out of control, heightened emotions, it's been left festering and is in this terrible state. It's like, no, like we're going to sit down and have a meal and discuss this. And it's not,
because you don't let it go so long.
right.
Yeah.
And it needs to be like when conflict arises, the longer you wait to address it, then the more speculation can come, then the more wounding can come, then the more festering can come. And we all know, especially if you're like dealing with like a wound, if you let it go and you don't address the problem, you don't address the thing that's festering, it will get worse, and it can become so toxic to your body to the point that it will bring death.
And it's going to cost you more in the long run.
It will. It costs a lot. Yeah.
What you compromise to keep, you will ultimately lose.
Yeah.
And we, when I was younger, and we lived in St. Louis, and we lived in a neighborhood. My older brother got a lawn mowing job. And so he had, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 lawns that he would mow around the neighborhood. And back then they probably paid him $5 or $10 maybe to mow. And he had this one lady. She didn't have a very, very big yard at all. It was quite small. And she would call him whenever it needed mowed, but she didn't have a lot of money. But she also didn't have a lawnmower. So she would pay him, and she's kind of a family friend, and so she would pay him to come mow. But she would wait until the grass was so tall that it was unmanageable. And I can remember going with him when I was like 6 years old, probably. I mean, I was too little to really do anything. But I would go with him, and he would mow. And when we got done, he was so exhausted. And it was not a big yard at all. He was so exhausted because he would have to cut it twice. The weeds were a whole nother story all along the fence line and everything. And then he'd often have to bag it and go dump it. And it was all because that instead of just maybe paying him to do it, 2 times before that, she would wait till it got so bad and be like, I need you to cut my grass. And so then it ended up costing him, and honestly her, more because she wouldn't deal with it. And I think that relationships are kind of like that. Like they are going to pop up, just like your grass is going to grow. If you're living in Colorado or something, you might pray for your grass to grow. But in Missouri, we're like, please stop growing because
right.
we have to mow a lot. But, so in context of our region, your grass is going to grow. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to maintain it and keep it looking and being what it needs to be? Or are you going to let it get out of control? And relationships work the same way.
That's right.
They can get out of control if you don't have a mindset of like, okay, let's talk through this. Let's work through this. And this goes, and it's not, and the thing is that it becomes really heavy and difficult the longer you wait.
That's right.
And like we've done this even with finances. Like we've had different times where we weren't communicating. Next thing you know, you're like, oh my gosh, we've got $5,000 less than what you thought because we haven't talked about it for a while or whatever. And I'm like,
and what? I didn't want to tell you.
Are you kidding me? And you're like, no, I'm not kidding you. And on top of that, we have a tax bill. And I'm like, seriously, when did you get that? 2 months ago, but I didn't want to tell you, so it got worse now. Like, for example, with finances, even this year, we've been more intentional. I mean, we talk about money. If it ain't every day, it's every other day. We're talking about budget and how it looks like we're really on top of it, and it feels manageable. So if you get a $500 bill in the mail, I'm not going to be like, what? I'd be like, okay, well, here's how we'll deal with it, because we're already in the mix. We're already confronting things, is my point.
Yes.
It has to be a skill that you develop, and you really learn how to work this thing. And if you do, it's going to make your life way easier. Not all confrontation is bad.
Right.
Because
That's
if you
right.
confront in love, you do it right, and you get the right result, it was well worth it.
Yes.
Because the truth is, you're going to
Every
have to
time.
face something. You're going to have to face something intentionally, or like it's going to be a byproduct of, oh my gosh, we have to do something
Right.
now.
So it's better to do it before it gets to this place of, like, we can't let it go anymore, because not only are we aware of it, but it has now affected and bleeded over into so many other things that other people know, and now they're like, if it breeds.
You don't trim your trees, your limbs are going to fall in your neighbor's house, right?
And then it's going to be a bigger problem.
Yeah, so keeping it at bay and being willing to just address it. Don't be afraid
It's
of
not
addressing
keeping
things.
it at bay. It's just addressing it.
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes, there's certain things. I guess I'm thinking in terms of like finances, different things.
Right,
You're
right.
always going to have financial problems that come up. But then if you have other things, maybe like relationship issues, it's not so much that they keep reoccurring, but it's just an issue that's at hand. Then you probably deal with that.
Right.
But developing the skills to deal with it,
Right.
that's something you always do. To keep the enemy at bay probably is the best
Right,
way to say
right.
that, what I was trying to say. And then you're always, like, in every situation, you develop a pattern of having good conflict. Then your friends, your family, your church members, your kids, your spouse, they're not afraid to come talk to you, because
Right.
they know that the outcome is going to be for everybody's best, and not just going to be a fisticuff.
That's right.
Whatever the heck
'Cause
that
you've
means.
built a
But it's not
trust,
good.
a trust relationship.
That's right.
You've built actually health around conflict.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you for listening in on this conversation. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and write a review. Share it with your friends and on your socials. For more information about Ward Ministries, check out wardmen.org. If this podcast is encouraging you on your marriage and family, we want to hear about it. Email us at info@wardmen.org, and make sure you keep your eye out weekly for the latest podcast on marriage and family.